Welcome to Engage, leading conversations that matter. Join in the conversation. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org. Send a recorded talkback message on the free Central Florida Public Media app. Leave a voicemail by calling 407-273-2300, extension 246. Engage is made possible with the support of listeners like you.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Coming up, we'll talk with the Orlando City Commissioner Shan Rose about the city's response to the tragic mass shooting that took place downtown on Halloween. Also, we'll learn about efforts to restore the voting rights of Floridians convicted of felonies. And a symphonic performance inspired by the civic engagement of youth premieres in Orlando this week. First, though, it is Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. We are in the final hours before polls close in Florida tonight at 7. We begin our coverage in Lake County, where Supervisor of Elections Alan Hayes is out surveying precincts. He joined Engage this afternoon for an update from the polls.
From an operational standpoint, everything in the precincts and all that is going very smoothly. We do have some problems with the state database with voters trying to find out where their precinct is and things like that. But that's being worked on, and by now it may have been solved. I'm not sure. I haven't heard yet, but that's the biggest obstacle that I'm aware of. But in terms of the precincts here in Lake County, everything is going very smoothly.
For anyone who might be experiencing that, what should voters day of know? What would you like them to know about this?
Well, we'd like to know that we're working on it, number one. Number two, they should go to wherever they store their voter information card, and that card should tell them the address of their polling location. They are required to go to that polling location to vote today. If they go to an incorrect location, the people at that location can tell them where the proper location is. But that's about the best that I can offer right now. We just ask that they be understanding and patient. It's something completely out of our control and out of our hands.
Actually, that's an important distinction that you made. Early voting, you could go anywhere within your county. Voting day of, you have to go to your assigned precinct.
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about turnout? What did you see with early voting and today as well?
We have had a record turnout in early voting here in Lake County. And as just a few moments ago, I checked, we're already at 76% turnout of all our registered voters for the whole election. When you combine today's census with that of the vote by mail and early voting, we had a little over 116,000 early voters, 42,000 vote by mail, and we're over 40,000 today also.
Supervisor Hayes, what do you attribute that record voter turnout to?
Obviously the public interest is quite elevated. It's a presidential election. That in itself always brings out a higher turnout. And this year we have the 6 amendments to the Florida Constitution on the ballot, 2 of which are very contentious, and a lot of publicity has been garnered by each of those 2 amendments, and people are very opinionated. And thankfully, they take the opportunity to express their opinion by voting. And I think that's tremendous. I think that, it's the least we as citizens can do today to honor the sacrifices that our soldiers and sailors and airmen have made over the centuries, to thank them and their families for those sacrifices by us going and voting. There are just so many other countries that they don't have the privilege of voting like we do. And I think it's a responsibility that we should all take very seriously and go vote. And yes, expect to stand in line perhaps for a few minutes waiting to vote. But that, again, is a privilege instead of a hardship.
When we're talking about these record turnout numbers and high public interest, we know the presidential election is a big one. And Florida amendments, probably mostly the abortion and marijuana amendments, have gotten the most attention, but it's getting a lot of attention. My question is, do people fill out their ballots completely?
Unfortunately, they don't. We do wish they would completely fill them out, but they tend to skip over the local races. People need to understand those local races are vitally important to your day-to-day work. Uh, those decisions that are made by city council members and county commission members, school board members, these types of decisions affect you and your family every day. So take the time to learn about those candidates and those issues and vote on them as well.
I have to ask you about security concerns. How are you addressing any type of concerns in Lake County?
We have a very good cooperative program with each of our police departments and with our county sheriff's department, and we are alert. We are not hypersensitive, but if we need it, we will absolutely call the proper authorities and we will handle any situation that presents itself.
I think one question a lot of people would like to know is, when are we going to be done with all that? Is there a way to estimate when we have the final results tonight, or just the long-term outlook?
Well, here in Lake County, we're planning to have all our results certainly well before 9 o'clock. I would hope that we get them in before 8 o'clock. But there again, we may not be able to close the polls at 7 because there may be people standing in line, and it may be 7:30 or 8 o'clock before some of the polls get to the end of the line and are able to close down. So I think, again, it's one of those situations where people need to be patient, be assured that we are on top of the situation. And just because certain precincts have not yet reported tonight doesn't mean there's anything to be alarmed about. It just means that they haven't closed their precinct yet, maybe. It may also mean that they haven't transmitted their totals back to us yet. And if not, we can always bring the tabulation machines back tonight and get the data. But before I go to bed tonight, we're going to have all the Lake County totals. I can tell you that. But if everything works as planned, our totals should be posted by 8 o'clock.
And that was Alan Hayes, Lake County Supervisor of Elections. A good number of Central Floridians prefer to vote on Election Day. Central Florida public media reporter Joe Byrnes visited polling places in Ocala to talk with a few of them. So, Joe, tell me about what you're hearing.
Hi, Sharon. I spoke with a 44-year-old man in Ocala who was voting for the first time. His support for former President Donald Trump drew him out. Here's a little of what he told me.
I'm a Trump guy. He's very passionate, and he's had several things happen to him, and he's still standing up strong, and I like that. He's not scared. I lean on somebody that's not scared.
Sullivan's top issue is rebuilding the economy. Another first-time voter was 75-year-old Elsa Maria Carrillo from Guatemala. She became a U.S. citizen earlier this year.
I am so happy. Really, it's something very special for me because I am so thankful to this country that opened the arms for me to be free and to be happy.
She also voted for Trump.
So, Joe, did you speak with any supporters of Vice President Kamala Harris?
Yes, across town at the Mary Sue Rich Recreation Center, I met 90-year-old Edith Adams. She had driven herself to the polling place and spoke with me after she voted. What brought her out? Adams says it's her freedom, the freedom of being able to vote. And who does she support?
Well, I like Harris for president. I have nothing against Trump except his actions, words of speaking, and how he speak to people and how he treat people.
Adams says she's a faithful voter who votes whenever she can.
I hope and pray that everyone come out and vote. Whoever you vote for, just make sure that you vote. And when you go to bed at night, be comfortable that I've voiced my opinion.
Central Florida Public Media reporter Joe Byrnes, thank you for the update.
You're welcome.
There's more ahead here on Engage. A state of emergency issued in Orlando following the deadly mass shooting downtown Halloween night. City Council member Shan Rose discusses their next steps and response. We're streaming live at cfpublic.org. That's also where you can find all of our shows available on demand. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. Ahead on this program, a symphonic libretto presenting the perspectives of young Floridians grappling with a range of issues, as well as the spirit and determination of youth.
I have this one line, it's really beautiful in this show about seeing these little glimpses of what it means to feel free. And it's just so powerful how beautiful this message is. And it shows how much there needs to be change. You know, if us young people can see it, why can't everyone else in the world see it?
We'll hear from one of the narrators of 17. First, Central Floridians awoke Friday morning to news of another mass shooting in the region. A 17-year-old boy wandered into downtown Orlando's entertainment district and, seemingly without provocation, started shooting a handgun into the crowd. 25-year-old Tyreek Hill and 19-year-old Timothy Schmidt Jr. were killed. They were 2 of 9 people shot. Another woman was injured in the stampede of people fleeing the area of the shooting. The suspect was immediately apprehended, and yesterday, State Attorney Andrew Bain announced the accused shooter will be charged as an adult. The city of Orlando has been struggling to implement safety procedures as the number of entertainment venues in the downtown corridor grows. In response to last Thursday's shooting, the city implemented a 1 a.m. curfew and restricted businesses from selling alcohol after midnight. Those policies are set to expire Friday. Shan Rose is the city commissioner serving Orlando's 5th district. She joined Engage to bring us up to speed about the city's plans for creating a safe and accessible downtown space for both Floridians and visitors.
Ultimately, we are evaluating short-term and long-term solutions. We had already been in conversations with some opportunities with partnering with the nightclubs and the businesses downtown. And so this will give us an opportunity to evaluate what's next steps.
When we're talking about the short term, this expires on Friday. Would you like to see these 2 things extended? And if so, why or why not?
I'm undecided. I would say that some of the businesses are asking for us to end it. And I guess it's just evaluating the whole situation. So it's a collective decision, and we weren't part of the initial vote, and we didn't take a vote on the state of emergency. We don't have to.
Meaning the mayor can implement it himself?
Correct.
In this case specifically, this was a 17-year-old kid out on a Thursday night. Should the city consider some type of under 21 curfew?
So here's the catch-22 to an underage curfew. It's where do we take them? And are we gonna? So the other side of it is, and one of the solutions that we're looking at is doing different pointed entries. What that will do is will reduce the amount of individuals that are coming in, and we get to know who's coming in. Coordinated entry access is what we're looking to do, which would be able to scan for IDs and scan for weapons. So that's one of the things that we are looking to bring back, which would help us to alleviate making sure that minors are not in downtown.
Is that one of the long-term security measures that you all are considering?
I would say that's more of a short term than it is a long term, because we've been in conversations, at least since I've been elected. We started having that conversation back in July.
How does that work? Like Halloween night, there were, 50 to 100,000 people downtown. How would that even happen?
You figure out designated. The city was doing it a couple years ago. It was just a little bit different. The laws have changed, and with laws changing, with individuals having rights to bear arms, what we're going to have to do is change a perspective, and it would have to come from the private sector requesting to shut the streets down. Private sectors can then prohibit on-street drinking, no weapons allowed, and they can kind of restrict the ages that they let in.
When you're having the conversations with business owners who are running a business and they want to see the curfew gotten rid of, the alcohol not ending at midnight, the sales there, do they have any type of input in terms of the safety aspects that are being debated now?
Yes, so the conversations with the bars and the nightclubs and the businesses downtown is finding a collective voice for coordinated entry access into downtown, which would keep everyone safe, as far as ensuring that we're inviting patrons who are going to patronize in a positive manner.
Are you hearing or do you have any concerns about the traffic and the bottleneck that could create?
So the current system that's being used over at Disney takes 3,000 patrons per hour. And that's just in one coordinated entry. So if we have multiple, everyone should be able to smoothly get into downtown.
When do you expect making a decision on some of these short-term measures that we've talked about?
We're hoping to have some of the measures put in place, hopefully before the curfew is up. Ultimately, some of the things will require a board vote. So it would be obviously depending on the dollar amount and depending on what the policy and procedure is. Some of it requires a vote and some of it does not.
We've talked a bit about the short term. What's on your radar when we talk about longer term security measures in Orlando?
That's a catch-22. I think what we started doing what we started doing is putting some of those processes in place. Earlier this year, we voted to 300 feet apart for new nightclubs. When we did the nighttime economy study, and I don't have it sitting in front of me, but we had some longer term viable options and opportunities, which will include, knowing exactly who's patronizing, from ID scanning to weapon scanning.
Commissioner Rose, is this a gun problem?
I think there's a lot of issues that we're having. When we think about a 17-year-old that's, out after midnight, some of it is our community. Some of it is, there are some families that may need help. And so that's one of the things that we are doing here is doing more promotion of some of our programs. We have a lot of mentorship programs here at the City of Orlando, where we're trying to work with some of our troubled youth and find opportunities for them to change the trajectory of their life and what they're doing.
What are your next steps in terms of working with the Orlando Police Department? What are you hearing from them?
Honestly, it's going to be they have the police chief does have a say so. And so let me backtrack. I want to commend the police department and I've said it publicly, for their quick response in um in detaining the suspects, but they will play a vital part because they're there in the nighttime, and they can give some input on places that they think that we can improve on, from where we place metal detectors to what safety protocols they think we should put in place.
Because this happened after they increased the number of officers out and patrolling, but this still happened here.
And that's why we're looking at long-term solutions of being able to wand individuals as they're coming into different checkpoints.
Commissioner, are there any other cities that you all are looking at as some type of model to create a safe entertainment or downtown district?
We are looking at several, and that'd be a CRA question, because we do have a nighttime manager within the Community Redevelopment Agency who focuses solely on that. And I'd have to go back to some of the conversations that we've had, but there are a few cities. In fact, when we did the restriction on nightclubs earlier this year, we looked at some places such as Miami and Jacksonville and Tampa and see what they're doing.
Technically, this could be considered a mass shooting. If we talk about mass shooting, it is probably something that brings up memories for many in Orlando when they think about Pulse. What do you say to the residents of this area who are dealing with a mass shooting?
We are here to safety is our top priority here in the city of Orlando. We are continuing to evaluate what measures we put in place to continue to keep folks safe here in downtown.
Shan Rose is your Orlando City Commissioner representing District 5. In all but 2 states, a felony conviction restricts or eliminates a person's right to vote. It's a policy that has been set by states. It has its roots in the era of Reconstruction. Florida leads the country in the number of disenfranchised voters due to felony convictions. For most of Florida's history, people with felony convictions could only vote after appealing to a clemency board. Efforts to restore voting rights for former felons came to a head in 2018, when voters approved a ballot amendment to allow Floridians with felony records to vote. There were acceptable caveats. Those convicted of rape or murder would not have their voting rights restored. The victory for voting rights was somewhat short-lived. Less than 6 months after its passage, the state's legislature added an addendum that required former convicts to pay all court and legal fees before voting. That created a roadblock that suppressed the vote of some of the convicted. The efforts to put felon voting rights on the ballot 6 years ago was spearheaded by Desmond Meade, the founder and executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, a nonprofit committed to restoring voting rights for people with felony convictions. On this election day, we asked Meade to talk with us about those efforts and his work overcoming what he saw as obstacles set by the legislature and Governor DeSantis.
During the Reconstruction era, what we've seen was a significant resurgence of felon disenfranchisement policies or laws. And so when the recent released slaves were now, when they're told, okay, now you're full citizens, and they took full advantage of it, and you've seen them registering to vote, and you've seen them actually electing people into office, that created a backlash from a lot of southern states who implemented what is well known as the Jim Crow laws. Whether it was poll taxes, whether it was literacy tests, whether it was just pure intimidation, right, through violence, state-sanctioned violence against the newly released slaves. These were all tactics that was used to discourage the newly freed slaves from actually participating in our democracy. Felon disenfranchisement was part of those Jim Crow tactics and was the one lone remaining Jim Crow policy that was able to emerge from that time. And many states still use it today. But Florida was the worst.
What is the current Florida code regarding who with felony convictions can and cannot vote?
Well, until 2018, Florida basically disenfranchised anyone who was convicted of a felony offense. And that disenfranchisement was for life. So whether it's something as simple as driving with a suspended license or trespassing on a construction site or something more serious, once a person was convicted of any felony offense in Florida, they lost their civil rights for the rest of their lives. And what included in those civil rights was the right to vote. But in 2018, we were able to amend Florida Constitution to allow for the reenfranchisement of individuals after they have served their time. Now, it's important to note that the constitutional amendment did have what we call carve-outs or exclusions. And basically what they excluded were people who were convicted of felony sexual offenses or people who were convicted of murder. But everyone else, no matter what they was convicted of, once they completed their sentence, that they would have the right to vote immediately restored.
You were heavily involved in Amendment 4 back in 2018. What did that feel like for you in that moment when it passed?
Well, that was an amazing moment. Folks, before me have been engaging in, advocacy to remove felon disenfranchisement policies in Florida. But I was led to actually take it to the highest level, which was the use of a citizens initiative. And so there's something that I was basically led to do. So I was extremely personally involved in the entire process. Now, strangely though, my main motivation at the time when I started was not for myself, but for so many others whose stories I've heard that, yearn to be a part of our democracy. And so when Amendment 4 passed, and it was called Amendment 4 at the time, when that passed in November of 2018, it was a huge sigh of relief, and it was a joyous and tearful moment. And my first thought was not about me getting the right to vote restored, but of an elderly man who I met 4 years earlier, who I thought would probably die before he ever get an opportunity to vote again because of Florida's old policies. And so it just so happened that when it was announced that we did get enough votes to successfully pass Amendment 4, he was next to me. And I remember him hugging me and crying. And all he could say is, I can vote. I can vote now. And so that was an amazing moment for me, right? Because, and what I knew then and what's been reaffirmed to me even afterwards is that there are so many people in our country that is yearning, right, to be able to vote, to be able to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves.
Months after the implementation, in 2019, Governor DeSantis signed Senate Bill 7066, and that led to the arrest of 20 Floridians who appeared to be confused about their voting status. Well, tell me why you're laughing.
I'm laughing because there's so much more to that. The governor signed Senate Bill 7066, which basically uh, tried to put a roadblock in front of the pathway to be able to vote. The citizens of Florida spoke very loudly and very clearly. Over 5.1 million, almost 65% of the voters said yes to Amendment 4, right? And to then have the legislature and the governor decide that they want to approach things a little differently was very disheartening. And they did that, right? And they went against the will of the voters, which we see today is nothing new, right? This is something that they've grown accustomed to. But they went against the will of the voters. And basically what they said was, well, before you can enjoy the benefits of the passage of Amendment 4, you first have to satisfy all outstanding legal financial obligations, right? The problem with that was the fact that if anyone were to go to the state and say, okay, well, how much do I owe? At the time, the state was saying, well, we don't know. And they created a catch-22 situation because they created a requirement to pay outstanding LFOs, but didn't have a mechanism in place to be able to inform people what those outstanding LFOs were. And so that started a lot of the confusion. And then a year or two later, then you had the governor create his election integrity task force or the election police, which then, once they were formed, immediately targeted returning citizens.
We talk about the rights of these individuals. Can you describe the impact on communities when these voting rights are compromised? We know there are disproportionate incarceration rates by zip code. Does this create
Yes.
underrepresented communities, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it definitely creates a chilling impact on communities, especially communities of color. And what we were seeing was that the majority of folks that were targeted were people of color. The challenging aspect of them arresting people was the fact that every last one of the individuals who they arrested, just like you've seen even in other states, they all had one thing in common. And that one thing in common was that they were all issued voter identification cards by the state. And every last one of those individuals rightfully relied on the state's ability to determine voter eligibility. But to then 2 or 3 years later, all of a sudden now get yanked from your home. In some of these cases, you had police officers going to people's homes in the middle of the night, right? And dragging them from their homes, right, with helicopters, above and lights flashing as if there were public enemy number one or some drug kingpin, and all for the fact that they were issued a vote identification card by the state. They relied on it, and some of these people actually went to go vote. That was extremely problematic because if you think you're doing the right thing and then all of a sudden you're surprised by an enormous police presence at your home in the middle of the night, man, that is a very terrifying experience. And anyone watching that would be reluctant to even try to vote for fear of it happening to them.
I was going to ask you to talk about the role the restoration of these rights play in reacclimating formerly incarcerated Floridians into their
Well,
communities.
Well, I think it plays a very significant role, and that was part of the argument that we made during our campaign to pass Amendment 4. The fact that that there are so many studies that shows that, number one, when you restore a person's right to vote, that plays a role in lowering recidivism rates. All right, and basically, what we're talking about is that if a person is released from prison, the recidivism rate is basically a determination of what percentage of those individuals released actually commit another offense and are rearrested and sent back to prison. And what we seen was that there were some studies that said, wait a minute, when you restore somebody's right to vote back, right, that's part of the processes of having or helping them successfully reintegrate back into their community, right? And so we've seen a direct correlation between a person's rights being restored and them not committing another offense, and that person being able to successfully reintegrate and go on living their lives without any future negative interactions with law enforcement. And so that was something that was very significant that we raised even throughout the campaign. I could recall one research that was done by the state of Florida showed that while Florida at one point had a recidivism rate of 33%, which meant 33% of everybody that was released would end up back in prison, when they looked at the people whose rights were restored, that recidivism rate was reduced to 11.4%. Right? And that is an extremely significant reduction there.
Just for clarity, I want to make sure people know that when we're referring to Amendment 4, we're talking about the 2018 Amendment
2018
4,
Amendment
Voting
4, yes.
Restoration
The Voting
Amendment.
Restoration Amendment, yes.
So moving forward, after what happened in 2019, can you talk about the efforts to get back to the mission of 2018's Amendment 4?
Yes. Once we seen that the Florida legislature was insisting on meddling with our victory, we rolled up our sleeves and we made a commitment that every one of the 1.4 million Floridians who should benefit from Amendment 4 will have the opportunity to do so at some point. And so when they passed 7066, which required the payment of outstanding LFOs, that had a profound impact on the 1.4 million. As a matter of fact, I think it impacted a little over 774,000 individuals throughout the state. And so, which meant that now we have a little over half of the people that should be able to vote now are facing a tough decision. They have to decide between putting food on their table or paying their rent or mortgage or being able to vote. And we felt that no American citizen should be forced to choose between putting food on their table or voting. That voting or access to the ballot box should be free and unencumbered. And so we immediately did two things. First thing we did was that we started a fundraising effort to help people who are too poor to pay their fines and fees navigate those waters, and we were able to raise approximately $30 million to help people pay those things. And then we also started a fines and fees program, which allowed us to engage pro bono attorneys that would represent many of these folks in courts and ask judges to either waive these outstanding legal financial obligations or convert them to community service hours. And so we immediately stood up these programs. We were able to satisfy the debt of over 40,000 individuals with the money that we was able to raise, and we were able to get a few thousand individuals through the courts to have their fines and fees waived or converted to community service hours. And these are efforts that is still ongoing because there's a lot of folks out there, like I said, over 774,000 individuals that need this type of assistance.
Desmond Meade is the founder and executive director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Coming up, sharing the voices of young Americans and their rise as activists for their own futures. This is Engage on Central Florida Public Media. Finally, this afternoon here on Engage, a story inspired by the civic engagement of young people is making its world premiere in Orlando. The orchestral work called 17 will be performed at Steinmetz Hall at the Dr. Phillips Center with the Orlando Philharmonic on Friday. 17 shares the experiences of young Americans in their own words. Librettist and producer Portia Kamens conducted interviews with the young activists to create a script. She joined Engage to talk about the origin of 17 after the mass shooting at Parkland High School in 2018 and her experience working with the young advocates in the years that followed.
Oh, it's been just amazing. I mean, it's been when I think about the period of time that the development of 17 has encompassed, it started, at this time of great national and international sorrow after the Parkland shooting, when people were just bereft and feeling this how will we ever do anything about this? And then it extended to cover the kind of joyous, energy-fueled response and March for Our Lives and all of the activism that followed, and then COVID and the kind of complete collapse of, especially for kids of that generation, life itself. And I kept interviewing them all across that time, and I feel like this is completely presumptuous, but I feel like from a great distance, I have watched many of them evolve from really young people, high school students, into like amazing emerging citizens of our country. It's really, I've got goosebumps just saying that out loud. They're all wonderful young people, and they've really given me solace knowing that here they come, I just kept meeting them. I'd find them on Twitter. I'd find them on Instagram, and I'd send them emails saying, will you ask your mom if she minds if I talk to you? It's like this kind of thing. And it started small, so like, oh, I'll talk to you. And then we developed a rapport, and every single one of them has an amazing story to tell. The hardest part of this piece was winnowing down all of the energy and ideas and life experience they have into a 25-minute libretto.
Portia Kamens worked with composer Ron Raman on 17, and they decided using the words verbatim of those young people coming into adulthood was the most effective means of storytelling for their piece. DeMontre Harris is one of the actors in 17. He recently graduated from DeLand High School and is a freshman at Florida Southern College. Harris joined Engage to talk about his involvement and experience.
I think right now, especially, we're facing some very scary times where our lives can change at any moment. This is a weird kind of place for America right now, as we're sitting with all these disparities and all these questions of how we should progress. And I think that we all have this idea of finding this dream and this system for everyone. It's just different ways in which we want to go about it. And so I think that this piece in particular tackles so many of these questions that a lot of us young adults face, like, what are we going to be doing? But also, how is this going to be affecting our children and people after us? Or will there be anything after us? And so it's this feeling of uncertainty. It's this feeling of hope and trying to hold on to any hope that we can right now. And then again, it's empowering and knowing your place and trying not to feel small in a society that can make you feel so mundane in its system. And so I think that really encapsulates where we are right now and how we're feeling as a society.
I saw that you felt like you were in awe of the message that 17 brought. Can you tell me why that is?
This piece, you get all these young people and they're talking about all these things. And if you hadn't heard that they were from such and such high school, or they had just recently graduated, or they're from this college, you would have never guessed that these individuals were young people with these thoughts and these minds. And it's so it's so intriguing how engaged and aware, especially this generation is, with all the things that's going on in the world. And it's so nice to see how much there's a want for a betterance of our society. And I think that this piece does such a beautiful job of showing how, even though there's all these different voices, there were numerous of interviews being happened, they're all being narrated by six voices, and they all come together to this one thought. And there's this one part we talk about, again, this dream and this system for everyone. And I have this one line, it's really beautiful in this show about seeing these little glimpses of what it means to feel free. And it's just so powerful how beautiful this message is. And it shows how much there needs to be change. You know, if us young people can see it, why can't everyone else in the world see it? And there's this sort of an angst to it, but it's beauty in the chaos of it all. There's just this cacophony of hope and want brought amongst this piece. It's really beautiful.
Were there any moments you had preparing for this where some of the spoken word just really resonated with you in a way that you just felt heard? Like, that is my story.
Yes, there's one little section that's in here that one of our narrators talks about how taking up space and trying to take up space and telling her friends to take up as much space as she can, because it's so important as a Black woman to do that, and how as Black people it's so important to take up those spaces so that if we do that, another Black person or another brown person will be able to fit into that space. And it's especially for me as an actor, where we can feel so blindsided sometimes with our voices. And again, there's this constant motif of listen to our voices throughout this piece. And it's just so beautiful to encapsulate that thought, especially as an actor, of taking up those spaces. And again, telling your friends, like, that's something so beautiful. And it's something I take with me. And that in particular, like, just, it reminded me of my why and why I do what I do. And even if I feel like, you know, this space might not be perfect for me right now, it might be perfect for somebody else. And it's so important to take up that space and to tell that story. And so, yeah, that part really resonated with me. I mean, I read through that and it just touched me.
How did you feel about the music? I think you could make an argument that the younger age group, maybe they don't feel that connected or just aren't that familiar with like the type of orchestration, the orchestra that you're working with. How did it impact you?
It took me a second. Honestly, I think that when I was first going through this piece, I didn't listen to any of the references that we got from our composer. I didn't read through the script. I just listened to the orchestration first. And the orchestration in itself tells its own story. And I think that Portia and Ron both did an amazing job of creating this coalescence of thought between what's going on in the minds of these children and what's going on in the world around them, encompassing that with the orchestration. And it's so beautiful how much this composition swells, and it makes us feel like we're opening up this world and this imagination of the narration, but we're also being brought in, and it lets us hone into what's going on. And there's like little moments and quirks where we hear some of the thinking that's going on in the minds of those people that are being interviewed. And just when you put those all together, it truly does fit in and encapsulate everything that is going on within this piece. And that in itself is its own voice. And it's something really powerful that just adds on to just the weight of everything that's going on in this piece.
So you have all these moving parts. How do you make it make sense in front of an audience? You've got the music, you've got the spoken word, you're trying to put a story together. How do you make all of it work and meld?
I think the most important thing as an actor, especially when you're conveying the voices of somebody else, is to be as empathetic as possible, but also remembering the why of this piece. It's so much bigger than the six of our voices. It's, you know, even though we're telling the story of a small group of people that were interviewed and young activists, their stories are also highlighting the importance of everybody else around us. And so this piece, although, you know, it seems like we're just speaking through something that is important, we are also highlighting the ideals of all these young people and all these, older people, anybody that has these thoughts and these questions and these answers about our reality right now. And when you think of it in full scale, you think of who this might be able to change, the catharsis of this piece, how we can drive people to make that change. It's so important. And especially right now where it feels so easy to feel like, one voice doesn't matter, one vote doesn't matter, one petition, one signature doesn't matter. They make up everything. And so again, it's taking up that space and creating that space. And you never know who's going to need this, who's going to want this. And so you don't perform for the people that already feel this, you perform for the people that you want to feel it. And when you take it to that direction, it just provides a whole new narrative as a performer.
And who would you like to see attend on Friday? Who should be there? Who do you want to be there?
Anybody that's felt small, anybody that feels like they have lost their community. I mean, it's so easy, especially here in Florida, to feel so outnumbered, so marginalized. And so I hope that those people know that there's power in their words. I hope that people that have questions about the absurdity of everything that is our social atmosphere right now and our systemic system, that they can come in and they feel heard, they feel seen, they feel answered. That this piece can drive its voices to many different audiences, and they can all come together and find something within this that fits their ideals and their ideologies. Or if they have any questions, they can get them answered. And so I guess I would say anybody with an open mind, anybody that wants to have an open mind, and anybody that's looking for an answer or a why. The last thing I would have to say is just this piece for me, it just reminds me of love and the simplicity of that life could be. And so I ask all audience members to come in with that mindset of what they want the world to be like.
Demontre Harris is one of the actors in 17 that premieres Friday at the Dr. Phillips Center Steinmetz Hall. Tickets are free. You do need to RSVP, though, to attend. The performance is going to be followed by a Q&A session. That's all for today's edition of Engage. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for joining us. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.